Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes giving too much of yourself can be the biggest saboteur of your happiness? Sounds contradictory, doesn't it? But it's true. When you live in a constant search for approval and validation, you end up losing yourself, creating unbalanced relationships that only increase your emotional emptiness. What's worse, this over-surrender may be undermining your self-esteem and causing a burnout that is invisible to outsiders. What nobody tells you is that this need to give without limits is linked to a deep fear of rejection and emotional abandonment, which traps you in repetitive cycles of dependence and self-neglect. But the good news is that it's possible to recognize the signs of this overload and regain your balance by starting to build truly reciprocal and healthy relationships. Want to find out if you really are giving too much of yourself? In this video, I'll show you 5 clear signs that indicate when this giving is no longer an act of love, but a silent trap, and what you can do to change the script before emotional exhaustion takes over for good. It's very subtle, almost imperceptible at first. She has become accustomed to always putting herself in the background, as if her own needs were lesser. The problem is that this doesn't just happen. There is an internal programming, often created in childhood, which makes her believe that, in order to be loved, she needs to be always available, solving, fixing, taking care of. And do you know what this leads to? Such a silent loss of self that by the time she realizes it, she's up to her neck in emotional exhaustion that's hard to get out of. And this pattern is treacherous, because to outsiders, she seems like an incredible, generous, helpful person. But behind this role of savior, there's a woman who's overwhelmed, exhausted, trying to keep unbalanced relationships afloat, where a lack of reciprocity has become the norm. She lives in a cycle where love seems to be conditional on how much she gives of herself. And the more she gives, the emptier she feels. If she stops to reflect, she'll realize that her own desires have been forgotten. The routine basically revolves around the demands of others: partner, family, friends, work. It's as if she's learned that the other person's well-being is worth more than her own. And that's where the danger lies. When there are no limits, self-neglect is born. And guess what? It's in this scenario that exhaustion, affective neediness, and that emotional emptiness that seems to have no end begin to emerge. She lives with a lump in her throat that nobody sees. Saying no seems like an act of courage that she can't manage. The fear of displeasing, of being rejected, creates an invisible prison where freedom becomes synonymous with emotional abandonment. She feels that if she isn't always available, if she doesn't give of herself to the limit, she runs the real risk of losing the one she loves. This fear turns relationships into emotional dependencies that drain her energy day after day. In practice, this means that she shuts up, accepts situations that hurt her, and overloads herself to avoid conflicts or withdrawals. Just imagine that friend who always says yes to everything, even if she's tired, or the partner who can't set limits so as not to see the relationship fall apart. These are behaviors that appear to be loving, but hide a desperate search for approval and an attempt to fill the emotional void that she herself cannot recognize. A practical step for those who identify themselves is to start experimenting with small no's on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be anything big. It could be refusing an invitation when you're tired, or saying you can't help at that moment. This helps to build healthy boundaries, slow down emotional overload, and gradually reduce the fear of rejection that dominates your relationships. And this silent courage is the start of getting out of the trap of self-neglect. She finds 1,000 explanations to justify what hurts her, as if suffering needed an alibi to be endured. He's going through a difficult time. Nobody's perfect. Maybe he doesn't know how to act differently. These phrases sound like a mantra to ease the pain of rejection. But this constant justification is a silent invitation to accept emotional crumbs, prolonging the feeling of emotional emptiness and the lack of reciprocity in relationships. This mechanism is an unconscious way of maintaining the bond, even if it is toxic or unbalanced. They try to fix the other person, sacrificing their own peace to avoid confrontation and breaking up. Imagine that friend who always overlooks her partner's disdain, hoping that one day he will change, while she is lost in the midst of her own self-neglect, and emotional overload. This cycle feeds emotional dependency and strengthens emotional neediness. To break out of this cycle, it's essential to start recognizing that it's not her role to justify or take the blame for someone else's behavior. A simple exercise is to list the times she has apologized for attitudes that have hurt her and reflect. Did this justification bring peace, or did it only feed the pain? From this reflection, she can begin to set limits, value her own space, and see what she deserves, without fear or guilt. And this awakening prepares her to face the lonely struggle of the next stage. She is the one who carries the weight of the relationship, engaging in conversations, sending messages, trying to keep the connection alive when the other seems distant. This constant struggle generates an emotional exhaustion that accumulates silently, like a debt that no one recognizes. Often they don't realize that they are in an unbalanced relationship, where reciprocity is lacking and the emotional overload is too much to bear. This dynamic can be compared to a boat that only one person is rowing, while the other just watches. They feel exhausted, but believe that giving up means failure or abandonment. So they persist, even when self-neglect is already evident. A practical example is to notice if, in recent weeks, she has been the only one to take the initiative to resolve conflicts or plan meetings. Recognizing this pattern is the first step towards understanding that the relationship needs balance. To start changing, she can try taking a step back, observing the other person's behavior without intervening immediately, and seeing if the effort is reciprocated. It's a way of protecting their emotions, reducing exhaustion, and asking themselves, is this fight worth it? Little by little, this awareness can transform her view of what she deserves and help her set healthier boundaries, preparing her for the next emotional challenge. When it hurts too much, the body doesn't lie. Anxiety, sadness, and that persistent emptiness begin to dominate everyday life. It's as if the mind and heart are in a constant storm, with waves of insecurity and exhaustion that don't stop. This feeling is not a sign of weakness, but rather that something inside her is being ignored, like the voice of her own body asking for limits and care. Imagine her routine, sleepless nights, endless worries, and that nagging feeling of never being enough. All of this stems from self-neglect, from not pausing to breathe and reconnect with your own needs. A simple exercise can help. Set aside 10 minutes a day to practice conscious breathing, a way of calming the nervous system and reducing internal turmoil. Recognizing this emotional imbalance is essential in order to break out of this cycle of exhaustion and affective neediness. The path begins when she understands that she doesn't have to carry the responsibility for the relationship alone, nor does she have to look outside for what she should find within herself. The journey to emotional healing is much closer than you think, and this realization is already the first step towards a new balance. Have you ever realized how much of yourself you're letting go of in your incessant quest to please? When you give too much of yourself, you lose the chance to recognize yourself, to value your own limits, and above all, to take care of your emotional health. Isn't it time you question this need for approval that weighs you down and turns your relationships into sources of wear and emptiness? What would your life be like if you really decided to put your well-being first? What changes can you start making today to balance the scales, break toxic patterns, and finally build connections that bring reciprocity and respect? These questions are not just an invitation. They are a call for you to take the lead in your own story. Now, tell me, what was the most powerful insight you've had so far? Are you ready to break out of this cycle of self-neglect and emotional exhaustion? If so, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there's a lot more coming to help you build healthy relationships with self-love and balance. Let's go on this journey together.